Welcome. Well, you're at home with Jim and Joy, and you are an important part of our EWTN family. And we're delighted that you have welcomed us into your home. We would love to hear from you, so send us an email with your question or comment to jimandjoy@ewtn.com. Today, we have a very exciting guest named Mr. Matthew Bunson. He is the EWTN senior contributor. He's also the senior editor of the National Catholic Register. I hope you subscribe to that and get that at your home. He's authored yet another book, one of his 50 books. He authored a book called St. Pope Paul VI. And St. Pope Paul VI will be canonized this Sunday, October 14th. EWTN live coverage will cover the whole entire event, and it will be extremely exciting and enriching for our church.
What a timely book for this time, and what a great holy Papa, Father in St. Pope Paul VI, soon to be saint, now blessed. Just saying that word Papa, Father, and how he took a stand on the truth regarding human life, the sanctity, the dignity of the human person, and the promotion of that life in the only vessel that can hold life, which is marriage, a man and a woman in a true union, a comprehensive union, and a child coming forth from that union. This is the vessel that holds that, and we should welcome human life. The document does deal with contraception, as Casti Connubii, a document in the 30s, did long before, but evidently there was a revisitation regarding the pill, chemical contraception, and how this fits in terms of contraception. Is it licit or not licit in terms of the marital relationship and having children? And so Humanae Vitae was a response to that, and declaring the teaching of the church down through the ages and the teaching of the natural law that contraception is not listed. You can use natural family planning.
Right.
You can space children. That's what I was looking for.
Right.
Licitly, and there's a way to do that, and he speaks about that as well. But what a great stand he took at that time.
Well, and what a great saint he will be to our church, knowing he was a man of full courage and stood steady at the helm while there were powers and principality, turbulent times in our culture to change who we are as human beings.
And Matthew's going to share a lot more than Humanae Vitae. Who was Pope Paul VI personally? What other teachings did he have? What was his involvement in Vatican II? He was a participant, and then he had to lead it after the death of John the 23rd. So plenty more to come. You're going to be well informed. We'll be right back. Matthew Bunson is coming. Don't go away.
Welcome back. Well, coming up in just a few short weeks, we will be having the EWTN Family Celebration. It will be on Saturday, November 3rd in Jacksonville, Florida, and promises to be great fun for the whole family. Just go to EWTN.com for more information.
Joy will be there.
We'll be there. It'll be fun. We'd love to meet you, so come on out.
We'll also have an EWTN Media Missionary meeting the evening before. You can go to EWTN.com. There's a tab that says EWTN Media Missionaries. Join the missionaries and join us the Friday before the family celebration.
You'll be busy.
Matthew Bunson is here with us, EWTN senior contributor, senior editor, the National Catholic Register, author of the new book, so fitting at this very time, St. Pope Paul VI. Matthew, wonderful to see your face once again.
Great to be with you. It's a joy.
Your face is like everywhere.
That's not a good thing.
No,
and your
good.
voice.
No, it is.
Love radio. Well, I've been on your radio show, so this is my first time on your TV show, and probably my last time on your TV show. But it's really a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, it's
Well,
great.
if you write another book, we'll have you back.
Thank you.
You really should come back with your new wife.
Exactly.
Right? Of 2 years?
We're almost at 2 years.
How exciting.
Yeah, so we met in Rome, and during the synod and all of the events surrounding it, my wife will be able to spend a couple days with me in Rome. and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah, Matthew, when Joy and I think about you, and again, you're a prolific author with 50 books. I used to purchase encyclopedias. You write encyclopedias for some reason. I don't know, Catholic Encyclopedia on the Catholic Church in History, in America, Encyclopedia on the Saints.
Yeah.
And you are, EWTN's everywhere, but you seem to be everywhere, both, you know, within EWTN, other outlets, secular. I mean, you're there speaking, representing all that's best in the church. But when we think about you, we think about your love for your family, the family that you grew up in, because you shared with us off camera, and I want you to share a little bit now, just about your love for your own parents and for your brother, and a little bit of the privilege of caretaking and growing up within that family.
Yeah, I had the joy of being a primary caregiver, as they say, for my entire family. I say that because I helped take care of my dad, who was suffering from Huntington's disease, and then my brother, who also had Huntington's disease. So my mom, Huntington's disease is an incurable, untreatable neurological disorder. It's hereditary. So far, so good for me. And my dad was originally diagnosed back when I was 3 years old, so this is a long, long time ago, with Alzheimer's. And then that was changed as science caught up with Huntington's disease, which was bad news, really, because it means because it's hereditary, there was a risk that I and my brother might have inherited it. I didn't, fortunately, but my brother did. So my brother, my mom, and I took care of my dad until he died in the 1980s in Hawaii, which is one of those great places to live, to grow up, to care for someone under those circumstances. And then my mom and I realized that my brother had the same disease. And it was one of those days where you realize the task that you've just been given. And everyone has a choice in life. It's a series of choices. And can you make the right decision? And I never regretted the decision that this was something you're called to do, that you're being asked by Christ to do. So my mom and I took care of my brother until he passed in 2008. And then I took care of my mom until she died in 2012. By which time my mom had had 13 heart attacks. So she's one of the toughest human beings I've ever met, and strong, faithful, a convert, both my parents were. My dad from Judaism, my mom from the Episcopalian Church. And she had that faith that carried her through. I mean, imagine taking care of your husband until he died, and then realizing that your son had the same disease, and then worrying whether or not you're going to have the strength to take care of him until he passed.
And that's supposed to be the greatest pain, is to outlive your children, right? And so then she had to bear the cross of losing her husband, her spouse, a beloved, and then her son.
Yeah.
But you've authored books with your mom, right? When we had you on radio, you had written that one book. I was on the encyclopedia about with your mom.
Right. I wrote several books with my mom, including some saints biographies of Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, Saint Damien de Veuster. We worked together in the Encyclopedia of Saints, and we worked together also on the Encyclopedia of American Catholic History, which is still the largest book I've ever worked on, which I think the manuscript is about 4,000 pages. And I'm not saying that to impress anybody. It was so much fun to be able to work with her on these types of projects, because you learn a lot just by doing it. And for her, it was also an exercise of love, because she had lived through so much of American Catholic history in the 20th century. Plus, she was a professional illustrator and a painter. So she provided so many of the illustrations for the books that we did. And when you purchase a book, you have a glimpse into her. Her style, her art. She was a phenomenal character, but everyone who knew her at some point in their encounters with her would discover Miss Maggie, as they would have a Miss Maggie moment, and you knew when it had happened.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing with our family a little bit of your own personal story and your love for your family, because that's always, people speak about Matthew Bunson, you're all over the place, you're sharing it, and for us it's like, he's the guy who loved his family in that way, and you know, kind of really did that, and that's why we.
And I still look back at it as the most important thing I will ever do in my life.
And when you told us this,
now, of course, caring for my wife.
Yes. That's the blessing of the story, right?
Because when you shared the story with us some years back, because I may have said, you know, are you married or whatever, and it's kind of, now I'm caring for my family, and this is what, and I thought, well, that's unusual, but it's probably what shouldn't be unusual, that kind of dedication, but I don't hear that much. And I just thought, wow, and the Lord's given you marriage, weddedness as well. You know, you were ready to say, hey, if that happens, fine. If it doesn't, I'm okay.
And to have those constant encounters with holiness in writing about the lives of the saints. it was a funny kind of preparation because my wife and I met, her name is Bonnie, in Rome at the Canonization of Caterina in 2012. So you can imagine the surroundings that we first got to know each other. She was an attorney, still is, and to meet someone under those unusual circumstances and then to discover this extraordinary person that you've met, and then that friendship develops into more, you realize the importance of prayer in your life, of the pursuit of the virtues, and then to have the blessing to be able now to share your life with someone under those circumstances.
How beautiful.
It's a blessing that I had never anticipated I would have.
Beautiful. Well, we're so
The
blessed
best
and
is
happy
yet to
for you.
come. That's
I think
the
so,
best.
yes.
Well, Matthew, share with us your latest book, Saint Pope Paul VI. And, frankly, I remember him, of course, growing up. But so much revolves around Humanae Vitae. We don't have to start there, but that's kind of like all that people know. And maybe that's positive, it's negative. But I think, you're trying to really bring forth the man, his life, who he was personally, other teachings, his spirituality. So tell us some background on Paul VI.
It seems as though, doesn't it, that all roads lead to Humanae Vitae with Paul? It's as you note, exactly right. Most people only associate Humanae Vitae with Paul VI, or they have this very negative image of this rather somber, sober figure who was Pope during a time of absolute chaos. And some people actually criticize him for not having done enough or having been too weak. One of the nicknames that they've given him over the years is Hamlet, because he would think about things too much. To study the life of Paul VI and then to study in depth his writings, his spirituality, is to begin to appreciate one of, I would argue, one of the great pontiffs of the 20th century because of what he inherited, and then how he became a prophet for the 21st century. And I know that's something we'll be talking about. It all starts in the little towns in Brescia, Italy. And this is a young child who grew up in a family of immense faith, which is one of those recurring themes that we always find with the saints, but who was also a frail child. Paul's health was always somewhat questionable as he progressed through his childhood and then into the seminary years. But it was matched by a love for spirituality, for prayer, for theology. He had immense talent for thinking, but he was also a deep introvert. So here's this very introverted person being thrust onto the world stage as he was, and it became a cross for him throughout his entire life as he progressed through up through the chain of the hierarchy in the Vatican. And of course, he becomes Archbishop of Milan in 1954 and has to deal with the largest archdiocese in Europe. But the thing about Paul that we need to remember, Giovanni Battista Montini, is that he always wanted to be a priest, and he always wanted to serve the church in whatever way the church asked him to. And so he ends up in the diplomatic corps. He starts working for Pope Pius XII, who recognized his immense talent and began putting him in charge of different things, including during World War II, when he helped run some of the most difficult jobs in the church. Imagine being the right-hand man to Pius XII in the middle of World War II. So he was in charge of immigrants and refugees, at the same time trying to run the Vatican City state in the middle of a war.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a statue of Pope, is it Pius XII?
Yes.
You said, right, World War II. It's an amazing statue there at St. Peter's. And there's nothing like it. He's got his glasses on and his lights, and you can just tell that he's in the midst of this swirling war and whatever's going on, and he's there. So this is one of the great influences on Paul's life.
Yes, it is.
What other influences were people in his life?
Well,
Saints
he served in the diplomatic corps, in sort of the Secretariat of State. So he was surrounded then by trained diplomats. And one of the key words that you find always in the life of Paul VI is the word prudence. People often mistake a virtue like prudence with over-caution, with indecision. In fact, Paul would ponder something for a while. He would pray on it, and he would always try to find the most prudent way to do something. It's why we had the delay, for example, in the publication of Humanae Vitae that we'll talk about. But this idea of prudence for him was helping him to make the right decisions. And when you saw his work in the Vatican, when you saw his work then as Archbishop in Milan, and then as Pope, these prudential judgments, but also the application of that virtue and trying to live it as a habit, it's really quite striking.
When I hear prudence, I always think of look before you leap.
Yes.
Look before you leap. And here were people at that time, especially in the 60s and so on, they're just leaping. They're not really looking at the implications of what they're hearing in terms of modernity and secularism and the sexual revolution and political upheaval. And it's like, let's quickly get on board with this. But he was one that looked and who pondered, who thought, who assessed.
And again, remember what he was seeing around him. He was seeing the world at war, coming out of World War II. He had this job, he was called sostituto. In other words, he was substitute Secretary of State at a time when there really wasn't one, because Pius XII effectively filled that job himself. So he relied very heavily on Paul and another friend, Archbishop Tardini. Both of them were very good friends. Paul, though, had this job of trying to manage these great affairs of state right after World War II also, when everything had changed, when the world was being convulsed by the philosophies, by the suffering of the Holocaust in Italy, the complete collapse of the government. Everything was in ruins. Europe was shattered. You had millions of displaced people. And then the church had to grapple with all of the ramifications of that on top of Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union.
Wow.
Imagine how hard this is with the world sort of on the brink of nuclear war, and you're advising Pope Pius XII on how to govern, and he's relying on you. So it was an immense responsibility in what was one of the great pontificates, certainly in the 20th century.
But what his giftedness of being prudent, of being holy and wise, and really trying to discern, because it is looking before you leap, because once we go off that cliff, there's no getting back.
That's right. And one of the great questions surrounding Paul was why he didn't become a cardinal earlier.
Right.
Everyone who knew Paul in the Vatican, everyone who sort of knew Paul in certainly the European church and the church around the world, looked at him and saw, because of course the Pope had to be Italian, that this was a guy who was almost certainly going to end up Pope. I mean, it just made perfect sense that Archbishop Montini is going to be made a cardinal and he'll become Pope. Probably a successor to Pius XII. There's just, I mean, there's sort of the script was written for him. Pius apparently offered him the red hat to become a cardinal, and he declined.
Because?
Out of humility.
He feared being Pope?
That's one of the great mysteries of the life of Paul. And Pius said, all right, this is probably something he was going to revisit. You don't say no twice. Catch was, though, that Pius XII died without holding another consistory. So the very next year, and this is where it gets very interesting, he was sent, Paul was, Montini, Archbishop Montini, was sent to Milan to be its archbishop, which was interpreted by some, of course, everyone gossips, was he being exiled by Pope Pius XII, that he had declined the red hat. Or, the theory went, was Pius sending him to Milan to give him the one thing that he didn't have in that whole magnificent resume of service, which was a pastor. So he arrives in Milan as the archbishop, and everyone thought, well, is this a punishment? Is he going to pretend like he's been exiled from Rome to this incredibly chaotic, tumultuous city of Milan, which was a hotbed of communism and fashion? What does he do? He absolutely embraces the life of an archbishop, of a pastor, a shepherd. And so many of the reforms that we see in the Second Vatican Council, Paul VI began introducing, Archbishop Montini began introducing in Milan as a sort of a ramp up, seizing the moment to be a pastor. I think he really loved it. And when you go back and you look at his writings as the Archbishop of Milan, and then you look at his writings as Pope, you're beginning to see this pattern of pastoral care and concern to the human person in the modern world.
Well, let's take a break at this point. The book is Saint Pope Paul VI by Matthew Bunson. He's going to remain with us. We'll be right back. Plenty more to come. Please don't go away.
Welcome back. Well, we always want to hear from you, so send us an email to jimandjoy@ewtn.com. We're visiting today with Mr. Matthew Bunson, and Matthew is the EWTN senior contributor, the senior editor of the National Catholic Register, and I hope that's coming to your house. He's also the author of yet again another fabulous book called St. Pope Paul VI.
And he's going to go to the canonization in just a few days.
How
there
exciting.
in Rome.
Just a few days, yeah. I've had the privilege of going to a number over the years, including Damien de Veuster. I helped write a book about him, as we were just talking about, Kateri Tekakwitha, and of course John Paul II and John the 23rd. So in my lifetime, to be able to have that proximity to saints is remarkable, but I always joke that proximity is no guarantee of your own holiness.
EWTN will be covering the canonization. Paul VI, Archbishop Oscar Romero, and several others will be canonized as well. We could speak about that if we have time to,
if we have
to go
time,
into
yeah.
that. But share with us about Paul VI's involvement with the Second Vatican Council. Then, of course, John the 23rd called that, and then he dies.
He does.
In the midst of it, and then just lay it all out for us.
Here we have Archbishop Montini in Milan, who had been sent there by Pius XII for whatever reason. And Pius dies, and everyone thought, well, is it possible that Montini could still be elected pope? Yeah. And the rumor was that there were a couple of cardinals who actually voted for him in the conclave in 1958. Wow. But it doesn't happen. Instead, they elect Angelo Roncalli, the Patriarch of Venice, who of course takes the name John the 23rd, who ushers in the Second Vatican Council. And one of the people that he knew from the day of his election that he needed by his side, who he was going to rely on for almost the whole of the time, was Archbishop Montini. And he makes Archbishop Montini the first cardinal of his pontificate. This time, Montini accepted. So he's the very first cardinal named by John the 23rd. Right. And he becomes this absolutely indispensable figure in the preparations. Imagine the immense task that John took upon himself in organizing the 21st Ecumenical Council. Bishops from all over the world were gathering. Right. Just the sheer logistics of it, the organization of it, and then you have the great theological discussions, the spiritual discussions.
People outside of the Catholic Church assembling.
Right. So Archbishop Montini, now Cardinal Montini, begins helping John to organize this. And he played this pivotal, in many ways, behind-the-scenes role in bringing order from the chaos. And John always knew that he could count on Montini because of his prudence, but also because of his immense organizational skill. I mean, this is a guy who'd basically been running the Vatican for a long time. But the thing that Montini also brought for John was this knowledge of how the Vatican worked. You know, John the 23rd had been a cardinal, he'd been a diplomat, but he was something of an outsider. So this cardinal, Montini, then, was kind of a bridge builder. And then John does not live to see the completion of the council. In fact, he dies essentially after the first session.
Oh my gosh.
Who's going to be elected pope? Everyone knew this time around it had to be Montini. Now, imagine that burden too, going into the conclave, knowing that you were more than just the favorite to be elected, that you were almost certainly going to come out. And when he did, you know, Paul VI, he takes the name Paul. Why does he do it? He wants to be the pilgrim pope. He wants to be a pilgrim to the modern world, like the great apostle. First thing he does is recommit the church to the Second Vatican Council. In other words, he's reaffirming the work of John the 23rd. It was perfectly within his rights as pope to say, no, I think let's just let this thing go. And that was an immense challenge for him, because now it fell to him to guide its deliberations.
And just in a nutshell, why the Second Vatican Council? I think it's like, we have a story that doesn't change, but we need to articulate it for this time.
The best way to put it was the way that John the 23rd did when he opened the council, that we have to find a way to communicate the unchanging beauty and truth of the Catholic faith to the modern world in a language and a way that the modern world can understand. We want to have a dialogue with the modern world.
Beautiful. Well, Matthew, we're going to pick this up again, so we look forward to having you back. Hope you've enjoyed the show today. We're looking forward to the canonization of Paul VI to become a saint. There'll be plenty more to come. God bless you. Keep it on EWTN. Bye now.